Hi, everybody. How's it going? I'll be with you in a minute. I'm going to share a few things. Hi, Rob. As soon as I share a few things, I'll be with you. Okay, I'll be right in now. There we go. Hi again, Rob. Hi, Dale. Russ. Hi, honey. How are you? Hi, Kay. How you doing? Please share, everyone. It'd be good to get a few more people here. So tonight, I want to talk about how the Iowa campaign is going for Bernie Sanders. And I think the answer is it's going really well right now. Kind of smashing. Rob says, still worried that Bernie can lose. Think about it. Jamal brought up some great points that create a big wrinkle in the race. Let's say Bernie wins in Iowa and New Hampshire. Pete drops out, and Warren and Biden both gain. I don't see Warren dropping out. I see her going all the way. The only way I do see her dropping out is if the fundraising dries up. It's still going to be a tough primary. It seems to me if Warren doesn't do well, okay, in Iowa and New Hampshire, and right now she's on tenterhooks, okay, on both. In Iowa, as we'll see, I think she's in danger of not getting 15%. So she wouldn't share in any delegates, okay, in Iowa. In New Hampshire, she'll probably get some delegates, but it looks like Bernie's building a big lead there. Okay. I think Pete is going to drop out because his funding is probably going to dry up. I mean, why go with Pete when you can go with Bloomberg? I mean, what does Pete offer that's different, from Bloomberg? It's hard to see. Okay, it's really hard to see. But let me get to some of the evidence anyway. So an article appeared in Politico. I picked it up in the reader-supported news. It appeared this morning there. And the title of it is, okay, it's written by Steve Shepard, okay, first of all. And headline is Sanders seizes lead in volatile Iowa race. New York Times polls finds. So here's the New York Times, kind of opposed to Bernie. And its poll is showing him in the lead, okay, in Iowa. Okay, there's an earlier poll that showed him in the Iowa lead too, but by nowhere near as large as this particular poll. Let me share this with you as long as we're talking about it. There we go. So the poll was released on Saturday, that's today. And it was a New York Times upshot slash Siena College survey. Shows 1 in 4 likely Democratic caucus goers, or 25%, picked Bernie as their first choice in the caucuses. This gives Bernie a 7-point lead over Mayor Pete, who's at 18%. In a very close race for second place with Joe Biden, who's at 17%. And Elizabeth Warren is a bit further behind at 14%. Amy Klobuchar is in fifth place at 8%. And she's the only other candidate who's above the low with single digits. Okay, now Amy Klobuchar is fairly well known in Iowa because she's the senator from the neighboring state, okay, Minnesota. But she can only get 8%, in spite of the fact that the Times has endorsed her, or co endorsed she and also Senator Warren. Okay, the survey, which was really pretty current, it was conducted from Monday through Thursday, wound up only 2 days ago. It highlights the pressure on Sanders' rivals, who've seen the Senate surge in the weeks leading up to the first votes of the Democratic nominating process. There was a post just 2 weeks ago that showed Bernie with a single digit advantage in the caucuses, although Biden has let in other surveys released since the earlier poll. But I believe that showed Bernie only in a 3-point lead anyway, not in a 7-point lead as this one does. Now, we can also see from the polls that Bernie also leads in the first in the nation the primary state, okay, in the New Hampshire primary. And I'm not going to read this stuff, but he has a pretty substantial lead in that one, too. Okay, it says about 6 in 10 of likely caucus goers, 59%, say their minds are made up, including 65% of Sanders backers, 65% of Biden backers, and 65% gave me or Pete backers. Because of the nature of the caucus process, 2 rounds of voting at each caucus site, including the elimination of low polling candidates deemed not to be viable, polls in Iowa reflect the voters' initial preferences, but not necessarily the final outcome. However, the Times poll tried to gauge voters' second choices. Okay, so among Bernie's supporters, a plurality, 44%, would pick Warren as his second choice. But right now, there's almost no chance that Bernie's going to get less than 15%. So I don't even think that's much of a possibility right now. However, the majority of Warren's voters are split between Sanders at 37%, Klobuchar, about 23%. So if Warren comes in at, let's say, 14%, and Bernie has 37%, of his voters, then in the second round, it's likely that Bernie is going to pick up 5 more points. Okay, he may pick up points from other candidates, as well. Well, Klobuchar, is going to be eliminated also. She's not going to get, her votes are probably going to go to Biden, and to Buttigieg. But she's only, at 8%. So that's not going to be too many votes that are going to them. They won't be able to catch Bernie, especially not with the extra 5%. So it also remains to be seen how Buttigieg and Biden and Joe Biden are going to do on caucus day. As the situation there is developing fast, and Bernie is still active, even though he's sitting as a prisoner, in D.C. right now. For example, they recessed, at 1 p.m. today. And Bernie was on a plane flying out to Iowa, taking the opportunity to fly out to Iowa. He doesn't have to be back, okay, until Monday morning. So uh, I saw him appear, okay, in Iowa, okay, with AOC, okay, and not only AOC, okay, but Michael Moore, okay, as well. Uh, and of course, he was doing his, his usual stuff, making a big impression on the crowd. Okay, and AOC also had a great impression. But on Friday, there was quite a rally where Bernie was not at. Was one hell of a rally in. Okay, it was actual in Iowa City, Iowa. Okay, at the University, okay, of Iowa, and there were some great speeches there. The lineup was really terrific from start to finish. Outstanding speeches were by Philip Agnew, who was standing in for Nita Turner, and by Michael Moore, who gave just a rousing speech for Bernie Sanders, and then AOC, who of course did a great job, okay, as well. But that whole program was strong. The minor players within that event were also strong. So they had put together a meeting. I mean, it was like an evening, okay, of entertainment. It wasn't even like a campaign event. It was a rock'em sock'em evening, okay, of entertainment. Okay, and even though Bernie was not there, okay, even though he was not there, I'm not sure whether he was on the phone, okay, in that event. Okay, I forget. I think he was on the phone for a little while, okay, in that event. But but the point being, to have a really enthusiastic event, okay, in Iowa that is sure to gain him votes, okay, I don't even think that he has to be there. As long as people know he's trying to get there, as long as they know he cares enough to come in on the phone, and as long as they've got some great events anyway, I don't see other people picking up any ground on him in the likely 2 weeks that he's going to be closeted in the Senate. Okay. Anyway, it's only 2 weeks till the primary. Okay, so in fact, it's not even 2 weeks; it's only 9 days now. Okay, so uh, I don't see him losing much ground in those 9 days. In fact, I'd be very surprised if his poll numbers don't go stronger and Warren's grow weaker in the 9 days we have. And what will happen to Buttigieg, okay, and to Biden, I don't know. I'm not sure, but I have to believe they're going to lose more ground to Bernie because he is really surging in that state. Uh, the other candidates who have something in that poll include Steyer, okay, at 3%, Andrew Yang at 3%, and also Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I think that the 7% from those three combined are likely to overwhelmingly go to Bernie Sanders. I think the Yang people, okay, are much more likely to go with Bernie. And I think Tom Steyer's people, okay, are going to go with Bernie too. Uh, I'd say 2 to 3%, okay, are going to go to Bernie. So I think that Bernie is probably going to pick up another 6% there also. So I think it's looking increasingly good for Bernie, okay, in Iowa. Uh, Now, for the general election, we have a little different story. As this article makes clear, Trump leads Bernie by 6 points, okay, in Iowa right now, 48% to 42%. Now, I don't think that lead is going to hold. I mean, I think if Bernie is running directly against Trump, that people are going to soon see the difference, and the margin that Trump has, okay, is going to go away. But the margin Trump has over Bernie is slightly larger than what he has over the Democrats. He leads Mayor Pete by 1 point, and Biden by 2 points, and Warren and Klobuchar by 5 points. So right now in Iowa, there seems to be a right-left split in relation to Trump on one side, okay, and also the Democrats on by the other. But I think that when Bernie starts to campaign, okay, among the Republicans in the state, he's going to have increasing success with them, and maybe such things as the Joe Rogan endorsement will help, okay, with that. But anyway, that's down the road a bit. The first step is for him to win the primary, okay, in Iowa, and right now he's looking very, very good to do that, and very, very good to get, I don't know, 9 of the 15 delegates out of Iowa. I think that's probably fairly likely, okay, at this point. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Trump's approval rating in the state is 51%. That's a little unusual, I think, right now. That's a little higher than his disapproval rating of 46%. Iowa voters are not in back of impeachment right now. 53% would disapprove of his conviction. So this poll was conducted by 16, surveyed 1,689 registered Iowa voters. It was conducted January 20th to 23rd. The margin of error is 2.8 percentage points. The sample was smaller for the likely Democratic caucus goers, and the margin of error there is plus or minus 4.8 percentage points. So Bernie's lead is outside of the margin of error. So we got to note that too. So Bernie has right now a formidable campaign team inside of Iowa for the final run from now until February 3rd. And that's apart from the state machine, okay, that he developed over a long period of time. And I think he comes in with all the money he needs to continue to hold his lead, okay, in Iowa, and to do extremely well there. Now, someone who's been watching Bernie in Iowa is Paul Street. Paul wrote an article for Counterpunch that he calls a letter, okay, from Iowa. That was published on January 24th. I'm not going to go through the whole article. In fact, I want to zero in on the last part of it. But he talks about actually a number of things in it. He talks about finally people realizing that Sanders is a threat. And he talks about the Hillary Clinton charge. Nobody likes him. Nobody wants to work with him. And he talks about Bernie to Iowa Nice, uh, which is based on his cheek turning response to Hillary's repugnant um, provocation, as Street calls it, okay, the other day. Street also points out that it's too soon for making sheepdog pledges for Bernie, and he shouldn't be doing any of that. Then he comes to a discussion of the House and Senate arrest. Okay, and Bernie is under House, okay, and Senate arrest in the U.S. Capitol Senate chamber, sitting silently as a feckless fake juror during the fake trial of a man he likes to call the most corrupt president in American history. He certainly is that. He certainly is that. The section I wanted to focus on here was the final section. Thought it was the most interesting section. Okay, the article. After reflections on the undemocratic character of the Senate, Paul Street has a section called Sen Exit for Millions in the Streets. And he says, considering all this, Senator Sanders should think about doing something remarkable. That's especially true if the white nationalist party succeeds in barring witnesses and new evidence. Street suggests that Bernie just walk out of the ribbed Trump, okay, McConnell, okay, and Alan Dershowitz version of constitutional democracy, which Paul Street says is a mockery, and suggests that Bernie could remove himself from the non-removal of Trump. He says, just imagine a Sanders Sen exit. He calls it a Sen exit. And imagine it being done for something bigger and more important than just resuming his constitutionally suspended campaign. And he asks us to imagine Bernie departing the senatorial jury notification to also call for millions of U.S. Americans to take to the streets, demanding the immediate resignation and removal of the multiply felonious and neo-fascist Trump-Pence regime. He continues, imagine Sanders calling for the holding of a national constituent assembly to draft a new constitution, but dedicated to embodying something that constituted the excessively venerated founder's ultimate nightmare, popular sovereignty. Such a constitution, among other things, would prohibit gerrymandering, it would abolish the Senate's absurd apportionment scheme, and ban private money from all public elections. And he says, Bernie, it would be good for you and your friends like Michael Moore, Alexandria Cortez, and Noam Chomsky to join Dr. Cornel West and myself and the group Refuse Fascism in trying to get the word out to the working class citizen majority. We need thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and then millions in the streets, day after day, week after week, demanding Trump and Pence out now, quote unquote. We can't wait for the appallingly undemocratic Senate or the money soaked oligarchic electoral process and the endlessly self fulfilling nothingness of lesser evil electoralism to save us from the rising menace of an accelerating American shift to fascism. Sanders probably doesn't want to use the word fascism, use the word fascist in order to describe Trump and many of his backers, but it's a critically accurate description of the president and much of his base. By the way, I entirely agree with that last. We caught yet another of many glimpses of how dark things may get on the streets and sidewalks of Richmond, Virginia, 4 days ago. Just wait until Sanders defies the odds by getting the nomination of the Democratic Party and defeats Trump in the general. See what happens then. And the street continues. Recently, I asked a left historian and journalist whose opinion I hold in high esteem for his take on the academic debate over whether Trump and Trumpism should be discussed in the same breath with fascism. My correspondent answered as follows, quote, on that fascism debate, one of the conundrums we face is basically this. If and when we definitely know the orange malignancy is a bona fide U.S. variation of fascism, it will be too late. So it seems to me better to operate on the assumption, based on plenty of empirical evidence, that indeed he is at the moment aspiring, and also maneuvering to impose his particular version and respond accordingly with a few million in the streets, unquote. And Paul Street says, wise counsel that, and ends, his article. Now, I'm not certain yet as to whether we should take that particular counsel. And I do think, if we take it, we'll probably need more than a few million in the streets. We'll probably need maybe 10 million to 15 million in Washington, D.C. alone in order to make it happen. Because they're going to bring the military from all the bases that ring D.C. And we're going to need an awful lot of people out there to make the military to come over to our side. None of them enlisted to kill their fellow American citizens. But the size of the movement will make a difference to them. If it's just a matter of killing a few because it's a small demonstration of relative 100,000, 200,000, for that, it's doubtful Trump is even going to call out on the military. For 2 or 3 million, he might. For 10 million to 15 million, he might, but then he might worry that it would be possible for the military to go over to us. Anyway, I thought that I wanted you to hear the idea anyway and to reckon with that for a while. So now I want to move on to the misunderstanding about Social Security I talked about. This is an article from my blog that I republished there. I wrote it some time ago, actually a few years ago. It appeared originally at Correnti Wire, which is now not there any longer. So I published it at my site. I gave you the link to it. And much of it dealt with the idea that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and was designed to critique that idea and to explain why it was not a Ponzi scheme. But towards the end of the article, I get into the misunderstanding that I wanted to talk about. And I'll start it off here. I said, lastly, unlike Ponzi schemes, Social Security promoters do not promise future payments that current returns on investment do not actually justify. This is true, first, because there are no returns on investment for Social Security, since it's not an investment in the first place. But second, even if one chooses to erroneously consider current Social Security benefit payments as returns on investment, it's very clear that the history of Social Security benefit payments since the inception of the program under FDR does fully justify expectations that future payments will occur as projected by the Social Security Administration and the federal government. Since the program's inception, every participant has received the benefits due to them in consequence of their participation in the program. The history of this performance is now more than 70 years. This is not the pattern of a Ponzi scheme, but one of a government entitlement program whose benefits are guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the monopoly currency issuer in the United States, namely the U.S. government. Some will look at what I've said, will brush aside the logic of it and the very important contextual framing, and will remark, as a commenter did in reply to Warren Mosler's fine analysis of why Social Security is not in a Ponzi, quote unquote. The commenter said, "You are splitting hairs. What will happen when the money being paid into the Social Security system is depleted by the money being paid out to people who have previously paid in but now are recipients? The exact same thing that happened to the participants of a Madoff-style Ponzi scheme. The system will tank. That's close enough," unquote. And now my reply to that. Comments like this assume that Social Security is a fund that can be depleted, that the government requires U.S. dollars, quote, in the fund to make its payments, and that the fund can only be augmented by FICA receipts. But this assumption is wrong, but it leads to claims that Social Security must be reformed, quote unquote, by raising the salary cap for FICA payments or by raising the full benefits retirement age, lest Social Security is rendered unable to meet its obligations. This is a false problem, however, because it ignores the capability of the U.S. currency issuer, of the government, to create the currency necessary to pay its obligations at will. I want to point out here that what I mean by currency, I mean currency in the very broadest sense, to include the coins minted by the United States, the currency printed by the United States and issued by the Federal Reserve banks, and also the reserves created by the Federal Reserve as new money constantly. So the currency issuer has the power to issue reserves and paper currency and coins. Now, 97% of the money out there today is in the form of electronic reserves in banks. There's very little in the form of currency and coins in circulation. That's a fact. Okay, Professor Stephanie Kelton has put the real issue very well. And I quote Stephanie, quote, funding Social Security is always and everywhere a political choice. Note she's saying in that first sentence. This depends on political choice. It does not depend on whether there is any money in the trust fund. The strongest evidence of this, to go on with the quote, comes directly from the 2009 annual report of the trustees. In that report, they predict gloom and doom for Social Security because, quote, there is no provision in current law that would enable full payment of Social Security benefits once the trust funds are exhausted, unquote. And going on, quote, in contrast, the supplementary medical insurance SMI trust funds are both projected to remain adequately financed into the indefinite future because current law automatically provides financing each year to meet next year's expected costs. Quote, it is that simple. The former is in trouble, quote unquote, because the government isn't committed to making the payments. And the latter gets a clean bill of health, because the government will always make the payments. And then I amplify. I think this really underlines how arbitrary the projections of financial doom from the Peterson crowd, the CBO, other government agencies, and people like Rick Perry, Paul Ryan, and Mitt Romney are. Apart from the silly and unreliable Social Security projections as far out as 25 to 65 years from now, the predictions of doom are really based on provisions in law that Congress can change at any time in an afternoon, which means that just like the fake national debt crisis, the fake Social Security solvency crisis is Congress's fault. But this brings us to an even more central issue. Assuming for the sake of argument that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, then who are the Ponzi schemers? The managers who want to structure things so that the promised returns are eventually not paid to the marks, the retirees in the program, and who also want to use the bonds issued to the program to enrich private sector managers rather than the retirees? And I said, I think the answer to this last question is plain. The very people who are questioning the sustainability of Social Security and other entitlements, and in particular Rick Perry, Mitt Romney, and the deficit hawks who are making claims of insolvency, are the people proposing reforms that will break Social Security's promises to retirees and future retirees while failing to ensure that Social Security can always make its payments and can never be, quote, in Ponzi, unquote. So I'm not going to read the end to this, but I think the main point has been made. What's in the trust fund, which is actually not a fund, but nothing more than an accounting record of what the federal government, of the obligation of the federal government to provide funds that were originally gathered through FICA to payouts in Social Security is fulfilled. That trust fund, that accounting record, okay, is a promise that what's in the accounting record will at least be paid out in Social Security benefits when the time comes to pay those out, when those payments are due to the recipients. Now, that doesn't mean in any way that more funds cannot be appropriated to pay further benefits to the recipients. In the present situation, the accounting record actually represents a promise that after, I forget when the year of, quote, supposed insolvency, unquote, is now, it may be now something like 2034. I forget what the latest year is. But even after 2034 is reached and the value in the trust fund goes to zero, if the projections at present are correct, and they may not be correct, after the trust fund actually goes to zero, the projected future FICA collections are projected to be enough to fund 3/4. Of course, these payments don't actually fund anything, but that's another discussion. Okay, are enough, let's say, to promise of payments to Social Security benefits of 3/4 of the value that they would be due under current law. In perpetuity, 3/4 in perpetuity, 75%. of what would be due in perpetuity is already covered by current law. So the question is, what can be done to change current law in order to provide the other 25%? So the terrorists, the Social Security terrorists, are trying to say that, okay, in order uh, to change the projections, okay, of doom, one thing we could do is to raise the retirement age so that the current promise guaranteed by current law and embodied in the accounting record would go further, would go further, so that the 2034 projection to run out uh, would be expanded to a much longer time horizon, perhaps even an infinite sort of a time horizon, assuming the current law never changes. That's one thing that could be done. Yes, but that would involve a change in current law to do that. Specifically, it would involve actually raising the retirement age. The second thing that could be done is to remove the Social Security FICA cap, the cap on FICA payments, and make the rate of FICA payments, okay, apply to everyone in the population, whatever their income and whatever their source of income. Now, that kind of change in the law would also allow Social Security projections as far out as the eye can see. But that's a change in law. Now, here's another change in law. Congress could make a change in law saying that when the current trust fund goes to zero, we order the Federal Reserve to supplement the sums that are projected for future FICA tax collections by the 25% more that would be necessary to bring things up to 100%. And Congress could order the Federal Reserve to place those reserves into the Treasury spending account so that the appropriation would be there and also the reserves would be there for the federal government to constantly fulfill 100% of its obligation under the law. So that's a third thing that one could do. Okay. A fourth thing, okay, that one could do, okay, is Congress could follow the model of the SMI trust fund, okay, and could guarantee could put in current law an automatic guarantee to provide financing each year to meet next year's expected costs before the fact. In other words, to appropriate the expected additional cost for Social Security 1 year in advance for the next year. It could use the same model it uses for the SMI trust fund. And then the value in the Social Security trust funds would never be projected to fall to zero. And so Rick Perry and Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney and Donald Trump and the Peterson crowd and the CBO could rest easy because there would never be zero projections for the Social Security Trust Fund. Now here's a fifth change to law, or is it a sixth? I forgot. I haven't kept count. That also could be done to change things. What Congress could do is to simply make the appropriations to fulfill the 100% of benefits that are due, and could order the executive branch of government to mint a platinum coin with the face value of the amount of appropriations that Congress has made in order to cover any projected shortfall. So that each year, the executive branch would be minting a platinum coin to cover the projected Social Security deficit in the trust fund. If Congress were to do that each year, it would also solve the problem. So the point is, there are lots of ways to solve the problem without raising the Social Security age of by retirement, without raising the tax cap or the FICA contribution cap, if you like, and without doing anything else that is going to hurt people. Now, let me make it clear here. Okay, let me make it clear. Yeah, because, like the politicians, I want to be absolutely clear here. I am not opposed to raising the tax cap on Social Security, as long as it is crystal clear that we are doing that not to pay for Social Security, but that we are doing that for the purpose of withdrawing existing federal money from the private sector to try to guard against inflation. Because what I believe is that the appropriations by Congress for spending should be separated in law from the tax mandates that Congress makes. I don't think the two types, of legislation should be related, in any way. We should appropriate each year the amount of money that's needed to take care of the entitlements in the budget. We should tax what is necessary to withdraw demand from the private sector of the economy to moderate or eliminate inflation, to lower the level of inequality that is in the economy, to discourage harmful practices by those who have an excess of wealth, including their undermining of our democracy, which has been taking place for more than 40 years now, for at least 40 years now. There are many good reasons to raise taxes on the wealthy. This doesn't have to be done through raising their FICA taxes, but it could be done through raising their FICA taxes. I don't have any sort of objection to that, as long as people realize that it has nothing to do with the congressional appropriations that the Congress has to make each year so that the executive branch can do the payouts for our benefits. Those are appropriations that Congress votes. That's all they are. No more and no less. And what we have to fight for is that there will always be the requisite appropriations for our entitlements. And here I have to say something I have said on many other occasions, and I want you to take it extremely seriously. Entitlements, okay, or an entitlement, or your entitlement, that is not a dirty word, okay, to be avoided. When you're entitled to something, you're not entitled to something because it's charity. You're entitled to that thing because you have a right to it. What an entitlement is it's a right. You have to insist that your entitlements are your right. And when people give you BS that, oh, they're welfare, they're a form of charity, they're this and that, and you're taking their money, and baloney and baloney, okay, and baloney, you have to then say, no, I'm not. Those are my entitlements as a citizen of the United States, as a contributing citizen of the United States. Those rights for me were legislated, duly legislated by the Congress. And it is not a handout. It is what I deserve. And it is not even as much as I deserve, because compared to other nations, the entitlements of the United States are extremely underwhelming. And we are going to change that in the coming years through the Medicare for All program, through Social Security expansion, and through the Green New Deal. There are going to be a lot of other entitlements which are going to be enacted. And if you don't like that, then you can get the hell out of here and go somewhere else. I want you to fight for those entitlements, because they are your rights and my rights, okay, and the rights of the rest of the 99%. They're actually rights of the 100%. But since the 1% don't seem to want to claim them, they don't have to. If they do, on the other hand, those entitlements are their rights too. So, I hope you like that. A few sermons in it. Please share, like, and subscribe. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And now I'll move to your comments. and I hope I will be greeted by a goodly number of shares and also many comments, which you know that, okay, I always love. No, Kay, that is something. What you're talking about here is the early Franklin Roosevelt. It is an entitlement. Now, FDR tried to say, he wanted to say that that it is an entitlement because we've paid into it our whole lives. But that was the early FDR, the FDR of the 30s. In 1944, in the Economic Bill of Rights, the Second Bill of Rights, he asserted the right to retire and live a dignified life in retirement. He asserted that as a right. So, his ideal, which will be enshrined in the Green New Deal, is that retirement benefits are going to operationalize one of the Second Bill of Rights that he offered back then. And the reason why we are entitled to it is because we are the people. We are the people that created this particular state and this particular government. And this state, okay, and this government is a monetary sovereign that's supposed to legislate and govern for the general welfare. And the general welfare includes the Second Bill of Rights, and it includes our entitlement to live in dignity when we retire. So it is an entitlement, okay? It is a right, and we mustn't let those damned rightists persuade us that an entitlement is a dirty word, because an entitlement is just another word for right. And a right is never a dirty word. It's something you fight for and something you celebrate, Kay. You don't have to justify it by saying that it's insurance because we've paid into it our whole lives. No, I don't justify it that way. I justify it in terms of the Second Bill of Rights. I have a right, and you have a right, to live in dignity in retirement. That's what Roosevelt said. That's the unfinished business, okay, of FDR, because he died too early. It's up to us to finish off the legacy that he left to us at that time. Now, Bernie Sanders believes in that legacy, okay, and more. Michael Moore believes in that legacy, okay, and more. In fact, for one of his films, he unearthed the 1944 radio broadcast that was made by FDR. It had gotten lost. And Michael Moore found the tape that was recorded at the time. You can find that tape in the Wikipedia entry on the Second Bill of Rights. So I know Michael Moore believes in the Second Bill of Rights. Rob says, I don't know if you heard, but the Iowa Register endorsed Warren. Oh God. Well, I thought they would. I mean, the Des Moines Register it's a very centrist paper. Normally inclines over to the right. When would they ever endorse a Democratic socialist? When would they ever endorse one? Maybe they'll endorse Bernie if he gets through his first term and he runs again in 2024 and he does great. Maybe they'll endorse him then. But right now, the furthest they'll go is the corporate tool, Elizabeth Warren. And Rich Serber's joined, Susan Eldridge, Kay Ryan, and Dale Weaver all joined. And Kay says, I've been watching most of those rallies to cheer me up. I'll laugh out loud. Well, I've been watching a good many of those rallies just to see the momentum grow. I just want to see the success of Bernie's campaign. It's a revolutionary campaign. There's never been a political campaign that's been like this. I don't even think the Obama campaign of 2008 compares well with this campaign. Susan said, Philip Agnew with these hands is one of the best speeches I have ever seen. Well, of course, he borrowed the with these hands from Nina. It was her speech, but he did a great job with it. He did a really great job. And he did a great job with his own remarks also, because he not only covered that in the speech, but he covered other things as well. I mean, Phil Agnew's a star. He's a star. Steve DeVore says hi all. Steve Gonzo joined. Kathy Langen joined. Gary Houck joined. Rob says, you think Trump is the most corrupt president? What's your thoughts? President Obama didn't prosecute financial institution, bailed them out, and still allowing golden parachute payouts anyway. That is pretty criminal, isn't it? Yes. Okay, it is pretty criminal, but I still think Trump is the most corrupt president. Because Trump is like a mafia boss. He operates exactly like a mafia boss. And he will use any methods on people to get his way. Obama was pretty bad, but he had his limits. Kay says, I heard a wonderful song made by volunteers today too. Okay, it was moving. Which song was that? And my daughter Devora has joined. Hi, honey. Kay says, I agree, Rob. He sold himself as a progressive and then was a corporate instead. No love for Obama here for sure, and no love for him here either. But I'm sorry, Trump is worse. He is just worse. I mean, Trump, well, never mind. And Kay says, John Larson out of Connecticut says, scrap the damn cap and make Social Security a livable amount for all. As I said, you can scrap the cap, okay, if you want it, but that's not what's making Social Security a livable amount for all. It will be made a livable amount for all if the appropriations Congress makes for Social Security entail a living amount for all. That's what counts. Not scrapping the damn cap. We really all need to learn that. That's a terribly important point. Evelina says, sorry, I'm late. Steve says, Congress can always meet their debts, and Social Security is no different. Absolutely, it's no different. They can meet 100% of the payouts, even if the trust fund goes to zero. And if they don't want to meet those payouts, those 15 million people had better be in Washington to make them meet those payouts, because that would be purely voluntary on the part of Congress not to appropriate the money for those payouts. It wouldn't be caused by the fact that the trust fund had fallen to zero. There is no causality there. It's a decision by the Congress. That's the lesson to be learned here. Kay says scrapping the cap would be the best solution, in my opinion. Scrapping the cap is a solution to other problems. It's not a solution to getting your benefits. That's what I want you to understand. Scrapping the cap is for taxing the rich. That's what it does. We ought to tax the rich. They have too much money. They interfere with our democracy. We ought to scrap them as much as possible. So we can scrap the cap for that reason. But you never have to lose sight of the fact that the real solution to this is always the proper appropriations by the Congress. That's the issue. Are they going to appropriate the Social Security benefit money for a particular for a year, okay, a particular year, or are they not? That's the question. Kay says they have made entitlement a dirty word. Yes, and we allowed them to do that, and we need to take that word back from them, because an entitlement is a right. That's what it is. When you're entitled to something, you have a right to it. It's a synonym for right. Don't let them take your rights away. Don't let the goddamn media take away your rights. Kay says, sorry, Joe, I disagree. Scrapping the damn cap is the only way to go to be secure. No, it's not. The only way to go to be really secure is to teach people that the money comes from the appropriations. It comes from the appropriations. It doesn't come from the wealth the rich have. It does not come from the money that anybody has. We have to teach everybody that public finance doesn't come, that the financing for public spending doesn't come from taxing and borrowing. The longer we stick with that incorrect understanding of what is happening, the more we're going to be subject to the deficit hawks and terrorists. Have you read or heard the Larson bill? You need to do that. I haven't read that bill. But why is it important to read that bill? It just says scrap the cap, right? So scrap the cap, all right. But it doesn't go any further than that. It doesn't teach people that the money comes from Congress, that it comes from the federal government. It comes from our public servants. It doesn't come from the rich. Have you read my blog posts on this subject? They're on my site, Kay. Go to my site and read the many blog posts on where the money comes from. Rob says, I hate how politicians frame the word entitlement. It is beyond fascinating how they turn the positive word into a derogatory connotation. The way I respond when entitlements get thrown around is yes. It's an entitlement. Because we as society decided when you were eligible, you were entitled to that benefit as a right. That's the way to reply to it, Rob. That's the way to reply to it. And Kay says, we can't depend on Congress. Laugh out loud. Kay, it's not a question of us depending on Congress. It's a question of us creating the Congresses that will do our will. That's what a democracy is about. I'm not asking you to depend on Congress. I'm asking you to make future Congresses and the current Congress fear we the people and do what we the people want and not what their donors want. And by the way, that's Bernie Sanders' idea too. That's what he is all about. He is all about getting real democracy in the United States. When you vote for him, you're not voting to depend on the Congress. You're voting to shape that Congress, to change its character, to change the Democratic Party, to get the donors off their backs and off our backs as well. Evelina says, scrap the cap to tax the rich. Congress must appropriate money for entitlements and for everything else, for both entitlements and non-entitlements. Congress always must appropriate the money if it's going to be spent. In fact, right now, what we borrow is destroyed by the Federal Reserve in the settlement process. What we tax is destroyed by the Federal Reserve in the settlement process. Those are not the reserves that get into the Treasury spending account. What gets into the Treasury spending account when it's refilled or augmented are entirely new reserves created by the Federal Reserve. That's what's really happening. Kay says, if we could depend on the Congress, we wouldn't be here now. No one is saying we can depend on the Congress or that we have been successful in depending on the Congress in the past. The idea is for us to control the Congress. That's what this game is about. Either control the Congress or get rid of the Congress. One of the two. Kay says, I'll read the bill if you read my blogs on where the money comes from, Kay. How about that? I'll make you a deal. I'll read Larson's bill if you read my blogs. You have the site now. You have the link. Go and read it and learn about where the money really comes from. Kay says, yes, it is. I have no damn reliable Congress. I'm all about Bernie, but we don't have him yet. I didn't say we had him yet. We also don't have the so-called Social Security crisis yet. It's not going to hit us until 2034. So, to worry about scrapping the cap now, you're never going to scrap the cap now with this Congress, Kay. You're not going to scrap the cap because the Republicans, okay, are all going to say, hey, we can't raise taxes. We've taken a pledge not to raise taxes. And we're certainly not going to raise the cap on Social Security. That's what they're going to say. And if they do make a deal to raise the cap a little bit on Social Security, they'll only do it by cutting something else that we need. So, yeah, we don't have Bernie yet. That's right. But when we have Bernie, we're also going to have a much better Congress. And each election that Bernie is in office, we're going to have an increasingly better Congress. But we're still not going to be able to depend on that Congress. We're always going to have to be active. We're always going to have to be perpetually active. That's what Bernie's telling us. He's telling us, it's not me, it's us. What is us going to do? Us is going to control future Congresses. Kathy says, some people just don't want to believe that their federal taxes don't fund things. It's so frustrating. They're just too lazy to think it through, no matter how many times you try to explain it to them. Well, okay, to be fair, Kathy, to be fair, it seems to people, even people who work in the Treasury Department, that their federal taxes are enabling us to spend, that they do pay for things. Okay? There's not 1 in 1,000 people who will read that seminal article that Stephanie did in 1999. We can link to it as much as we want, and we have, and we will continue to link to it. Okay. But most people can't wade their way through that article, and when they get through it, they don't quite grasp it or understand it. But that article does show, it does absolutely show that the money or the reserves that wind up in the Treasury spending accounts are not the reserves that are paid in taxes. And so we have 2 new comments. Laugh out loud. Okay, Joe, I'm out of here for tonight. If I wanted to argue, I would go to a different site. I know that, but my point remains the same. Scrapping the cap is raising taxes on the rich. Well, as I said, Kay, I'm in agreement with raising taxes on the rich, and I'm happy to scrap the cap for that reason. And Lana says, we have to stand and demand the change that we need. If we still believe in the fairy tale Social Security trust fund, it ain't going to happen. Okay, everybody, I think Kay got mad at us. Good night, Kay. I'm sorry that we so emphatically defended our point of view on this. Okay, I don't know if there are any other comments. Okay, if there are other comments, please let me have them. And if not, I'll be saying good night until Monday. When I'll probably talk about, what the hell is that bill called again? Oh, I'll probably talk about Senate Bill 2765, which is entitled the Bipartisan Congressional Budget Reform Act. I'll talk about that, also known as the Automatic Austerity Bill. There are various reasons why that doesn't have to be the case, but still, the bill is a terrible idea, and it's a terrible idea because what it does is it's all based on this myth that what funds federal spending is taxing, okay, and also borrowing. And so it's all about the possibility that the federal government could go broke if the debt to GDP ratio goes too high. So this bill is all about trying to limit the size of the debt to GDP ratio and trying to limit the size of the deficit through reducing the deficit when the government fails to meet its targets that were previously set. So we'll be discussing that, I believe, Kate, on Monday night, unless something else more important intervenes. Any more comments? Russ asks, what day is the Iowa caucus? February 3rd. February 3rd. And the New Hampshire primary is February 11th. And the Nevada caucus is February 22nd. And I believe the South Carolina primary is February 28th, if I'm not mistaken. So that should give you the schedule. Susan says good night. Okay, any other comments? Okay, then, have a happy day tomorrow and a happy day on Monday. Okay, good night, Russ. Okay, and everyone. I'll see you Monday night. And Rob says, good night, Yoda. Good night, Rob.